Welcome to a special edition of All About Bitcoin, a show dedicated to all things, questions, and markets related to Bitcoin, little b for the currency, and Bitcoin, big B, for the network. A collective discovery to understand, apply, and use this innovation. All Bitcoin, all the time. I'm your host, Christine Lee, and coming up we have a key barrier to Bitcoin's mass adoption is education. Bitcoin seems puzzling to some, even nefarious to others. But one dynamic duo that has tried to cut through the noise and misconceptions surrounding Bitcoin is, well, these guys. No, not the two on the right, pop duo Hall & Oates, but the two muckraking Wall Street Journal reporters on the left, Paul Vigna and Michael J. Casey. Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, CNBC's Brian Kelly asking, any chance you get the band back together? Well, here you are. Paul, and welcome, Paul and Michael.
Hi, thanks.
All right, well.
Yeah, well, any chance, though, these days there's more rivalry than we had back then. We were both, part of the same news organization. Now it's competing, so the band, it might be a little bit more divisive than it used to be.
It's a friendly competition, though. We're not bitter enemies.
Well,
I still like that riff that you pull off on the guitar there, Paul. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Paul and Michael, you've both written two
here.
definitive books, 2015's The Age of Cryptocurrency, How Bitcoin and Digital Money Are Challenging the Global Economic Order, and 2018's The Truth Machine, The Blockchain and the Future of Everything. So pleased to have both authors on this show, Paul Vigna and Michael J. Casey, with us today. So Paul, you are still at the Journal. Michael, you're now the Chief Content Officer at CoinDesk. So in all fairness, we had a bit of an in landing this reunion interview. It took a bit, but not too much arm pulling there. But we have a special...
No arm pulling.
Yeah. We have a special video for you. Have a look. All right. Until we get that video, I'll bring up the book. So for me, The Age of Cryptocurrency eloquently presented the macro significance of Bitcoin, a primer on how the underlying technology works and how it changed the world, how it will change the world. So this book was written 6 years ago. In crypto years, that's the equivalent of about 100 years ago. A lot has happened in Bitcoin's short history. So Michael, what do you think you got right versus what you got wrong?
I think the primary difference in the way that we were seeing the world then with now, at least with regards to Bitcoin, remember Bitcoin was the story. There wasn't a lot of else that was out there. It was just starting to emerge, Ethereum, was to see Bitcoin and to frame it as this payment vehicle that would just, we thought the big story then was like all these merchants that were adopting it and using it, and that it would really evolve as a payments vehicle, a medium of exchange. I think now, and I don't know this is definitely what it will always be in the future, I do think there's a huge opportunity for Bitcoin to evolve into a payments vehicle. But the big story has become digital gold, the idea of it as an asset, a speculative asset, and to hold and to use as a reserve asset. We certainly address that in the book, but I think we spent a lot of time thinking about payments. So that's one of the things I think that whether we got wrong or right with timing was certainly off. I think that one thing that I'm finding that I'm very pleased with is there's a certain prescience, I think, to the fact that we said how significant it was going to be when big name players started to arrive, and we speculated about big firms being involved. And that's clearly the big the story of the moment with institutional investors, and of course the big news from yesterday of Tesla buying it as a reserve asset. So yeah, I think we've touched on there's quite a bit there that was relevant. Also CBDCs, I think we did a pretty good job of talking through the possibility that central banks would, whether or not they would use Bitcoin, they would engage in some form of creation around digital currency. And I felt like that was a rather prescient piece to our book.
Right. A lot has changed since then. You know what? We have the video that I had mentioned before. Let's have a listen.
Do we know what a Bitcoin is?
the online currency.
So I was
10,000 bitcoins, do you know what I would buy? Get you that car you
Bitcoin is a virtual coin.
A Bitcoin is an online currency kind of thing.
I think that it's someone who take a lot of money, who ate a lot of money, and that's it.
I want to say it's like $9.
When he wrote about the way things are and the way things are.
It sounds like a coin with a bite in it.
Down the road it will be told about the death of.
I'm a Bitcoin bear and I'm scaring the status quo. That crypto going and that foul upload. In the algorithm, gonna get him.
Okay, so a blast from the past there, huh? I believe that was your promo video from when the book launch happened in 2015, right?
Yeah. That was we did a trailer. We did a book trailer. Mike and I just walked out into Times Square, set up a camera, and just asked people, what is Bitcoin? We asked them that question. We were trying to make the point that nobody really knows what Bitcoin is, and that's why you need a book about it. But that was great. That was great fun. I love that. I still watch that video. I still listen to the songs. I still watch that video.
Times have changed since then, obviously.
They have. That was my first. That was my directorial debut. Is what that was.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
I think what I think is interesting is at the time we tried to sell the book, and I remember this. I remember with the numbers. Our great agent Gillian McKenzie sends out. I can't believe I'm trying to poor girl's name. Sends out a pitch to 26 publishers in New York City. 6 of them were interested, and we got 1 offer. And one of the real issues that held us up was that a lot of publishers weren't even sure if Bitcoin would be a thing by the time the book got published. That was why they were reticent to take it on as a project. There was a lot of doubt at the time that Bitcoin was going to even last long enough to write and publish and edit and manufacture a book. So the fact that we found one editor who was willing to do it, and we got the book out, and that 6 years later we're sitting here talking about it, that alone I think is what proves that the book was prescient, was right, was correct, that we got it right.
Not much of a problem.
I'm not going to nitpick
There's a lot more demand for information and knowledge in the crypto space now. I want to read a passage from the book, The Age of Cryptocurrency. And this is when you go into a bit of the history. There was a family or a couple, the Craigs, were unlikely proselytizers. She was a graphic artist. He made corporate videos. Neither is a coder or entrepreneur. They eventually got married, and they would live for 90 days on nothing but Bitcoin and film the whole thing for a documentary. So, Paul, the first part of the book documents the history of Bitcoin, mentioning how it is used for payments. Has that narrative changed quite a bit since then?
Yes. I mean, it's gone... like Mike was talking about before, I mean, it's gone in one completely different direction. And, we might see it change this year. I think you look at what Tesla, look, the interesting things about Tesla's announcement yesterday weren't so much that Elon Musk is into Bitcoin. We knew that. The size of the purchase was obviously huge, 1.5 billion. It was a huge number. And the fact that they plan to accept Bitcoin for Teslas. That's interesting. So that'll be one interesting thing. But the more interesting thing that might sort of swing the pendulum back is going to be what PayPal does. At some point this year, they're going to turn on a function that will allow their users, if you have a Bitcoin balance, you can tap that balance for payments. So there are about 330 PayPal users around the world. There are about 26 million merchants that use PayPal as a service. So the whole idea that Bitcoin could become a tool for payments, that's not a direct path, but that's sort of an indirect path. PayPal could be the sort of big, it's almost like, remember the American Express cards, the old ads? If you're old enough, sorry, folks. It used to be, it was accepted everywhere you want to be or something. PayPal gets Bitcoin just about everywhere you want to be. So Bitcoin, the pendulum towards payments could come back.
Yeah. Let's do a price check on Bitcoin. Bitcoin touching record highs above 48,000 earlier Tuesday morning. The XBX Bitcoin price is now trading at about above $47,000. It's up 10% over the past 24 hours, according to TradeBlock data. The now it's just under $47,000. The XBX has been the most reliable Bitcoin reference price, sure does, for institutions since 2014, with billions in assets under management benchmarked against it. So now when you published The Age of Cryptocurrency in 2015, Bitcoin reached a high of over $400. In 2018, when you published The Truth Machine, another book you co-authored, Bitcoin reached a high of about 15,000. Are you surprised by Bitcoin's price today, or not really?
Look,
Mike, you go first.
Yeah, I always like the thesis, and again, this isn't never giving investment advice, never giving price predictions. That's kind of like a rule of thumb for journalists. But I like the thesis, at least, that it was either going to be all or nothing. That 21 million is this scarcity play, and if enough people buy into it, and the concept of it being this digital gold idea catches on, then the price could go very, very high. Like Wences Casares, one of the early, Bitcoin OGs to get involved in the space as entrepreneurs, to say, look, it could be $1 million or it could be zero. And that sort of binary outcome aspect of, I think, was an important way to frame the conversation around Bitcoin. Once you started to see the Guggenheims and the Stanley Druckenmillers and the Millers and, now obviously Musk and everyone else started to have this conversation, the idea that it's got a lot higher to go actually starts to be less surprising, because it's just a math game, right? There's only X amount of Bitcoin and there's Y amount of dollars in the world that might want to park there. So if we are reaching this point where there's broad-based acceptance, then it starts to look less surprising. That's, again, not a prediction, because there's still all sorts of things that could go wrong. And, we can talk about those, but I'm certainly always stunned. Like, these charts are amazing. And we were there when it was $500. And in fact, we came out, Mt. Gox had happened in the year that we were writing this, which had taken the thing all the way down to $200, I think it was, from its kind of that back then super lofty peak of $1,000 at the end of 2013. And then it sort of stayed there throughout 2014, 2015. Really wasn't until sort of midway 2016 it started to pick up again. And so then we were just sort of the whole idea of it as being a wildly speculative asset had diminished somewhat in that part of the phase of the book's outcome. This latest rise will happen later on.
We see that day by day, that volatility coming down. We're going to pause for a break, but coming up, more with Paul and Michael on the present state of crypto, how it started and how it evolved. Welcome back. Joining me are co-authors Paul Vigna and Michael J. Casey. Welcome back. The concept of digital cash is not new. We have the illusion of digital money today, masking a complicated settlement layer, front-end, back-end processing maze within the traditional banking system. But there are other precedents to Bitcoin. DigiCash, created by cryptography pioneer David Chaum, who's referenced in your book. Citi's eCash, a bank project led by Shalom Rosen, is also mentioned. Their projects never took off, but Bitcoin did. Why?
Yeah, look, there are a lot of reasons, but one that I think is sort of one of the more underappreciated reasons, and I think actually at this exact moment kind of speaks a lot to this exact moment, is the timing of when Bitcoin was released, the environment it was released into. If you remember, it was right after the financial crisis. Actually, it was during the financial crisis. Entire global financial infrastructure is melting down and did melt down. The central banks came in and bailed them out. So people were angry, people were hurt, people were losing jobs. I mean, everything was a disaster, right? And here comes this thing saying, look, here is a different way to build a financial network. Here's an alternative. And I think people were open to that idea. People were looking for that idea, and people seized upon that idea. And what Bitcoin became, in my mind, is it really became almost like a third big social reaction to the financial crisis. And the other two were political. You had the Tea Party movement, you had the Occupy Wall Street movement. Bitcoin was another movement. The difference was that rather than being centered around politics, it was centered around a technology. It was always, if you want to put it in today's parlance, it was centered around a meme. It was an idea, and people gravitated towards it. I think if Bitcoin had come out at a different time, not that it wouldn't have succeeded, because I personally think the program itself is extremely elegant and very powerful. And I think if you can appreciate it just on an engineering level, it's really incredible. But I think it would have taken longer, or it may not have happened at all. I think it happened to hit a moment where people were just desperate for some kind of answer. They weren't getting it from the normal places, and they gravitated towards this one.
All right. Now, the idea of Bitcoin as a movement or as a community, which you were among the first to develop a sense of in your book, spans also art, music, and other cultural phenomena. Now, in the age of meme coins and crypto tribes, these ideas are still relevant. Online communities that pumped GameStop and Dogecoin are all essentially linked. Michael, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I'm glad we're talking about this, because I think, again, Bitcoin, incredible technology. It does solve a real problem that hadn't been solved. Let's just put that on the table as well. I mean, the double spend problem really didn't have a solution in a decentralized environment until proof of work came along. However, totally with Paul, all this wouldn't happen. Now, we live in a decentralized information economy. We live in a world where attention is the currency that gets you power. And it's a decentralized social media environment. And so essentially that world is about memes. Memes are the means by which, and by that I think something far more actually broad than just the idea of an internet meme. It is this whole idea of a cultural unit. I actually wrote a different book about this with Oliver Luckett called The Social Organism, another pitch. But ultimately memes are this force for communicating in these decentralized communities. So and money is a function of community. How do you build community? How do you build an information network that works in sort of some sort of solidarity by developing these memes? And so, yeah, I mean, Elon Musk is essentially playing a meme game when he's tweeting about Bitcoin, and there's a return on that. Whether this is good or bad is a different point. It's just the way the world is in a social media environment. Memes are fundamental to how we talk about it. Money, by the way, is also a language. It's a means by which we communicate with each other. So, look, I think memes and money go together. Look at the dollar. It's filled with all these, a dollar note, all these images, all of this history, all of this conversation is a key part of what, a monetary unit is.
Just going back a step, my sense of, why DigiCash and the city's eCash perhaps didn't work was it didn't have the community that Bitcoin has. Bitcoin's community, libertarian, carnivore, and even Ethereum, we're seeing their community, which is almost the opposite, vegan and hipster. So these communities backing these protocols are key to how they're gaining in popularity. I want to take a break just now, but coming up, wrapping up my conversation with authors of The Age of Cryptocurrency, we'll discuss the future of Bitcoin, for better or for worse. If I think about what I would like to cover in history, 20, 30 years ago, it would have been the internet. It would have been the whole social media boom. Now this is our turn. This is this generation's turn to cover the future of money, Web 3.0.
I can't think of a more important story than this one to be telling. We're talking about the transformation of money itself. So to tell this story, right, the most significant story in finance that's around, we need new mediums, new ways to reach people, new ways to reach this global audience, the human beings for whom this is going to be most important. So this is why we're really excited to launch CoinDesk TV, because it's another way to reach people. It's another way to communicate. It brings to life the stories that sometimes can be difficult to access.
We're going to see a huge paradigm shift. We're going to see how it lives digitally, natively in the internet. We're going to see that transformation shift.
This is a huge opportunity to tell a very, very important story that reaches a wide audience that has the potential to change everything.
We're building a financial system across the world with Bitcoin, several other cryptocurrencies, digital currencies made by central banks, and that is going to be epic.
This is a huge opportunity to do this differently, and CoinDesk TV is going to sit right in the middle of all of that.
Welcome back. We're joined by the authors of The Age of Cryptocurrency, Paul Vigna and Michael J. Casey. We talked about Bitcoin's past and present, but what is its future? Where does Bitcoin go from here? We have Tesla's annual filing with the SEC disclosing a purchase of $1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin. Is Bitcoin going to be the tool for only the rich? Michael?
It's funny, just in the break, I was just looking up Twitter, and I did notice that Misha Gutentag had asked a question of me to ask Paul, and that was like why there was no mention of the Lightning Network in his piece today. And I'm going to use that as not to necessarily get Paul to answer it, but I'm going to say, look, that is the great potential, right? That we have a layer 2 solution that gets us away from the problem that is one reason why the only thing Bitcoin can really be for the time being in a large scale basis is as a store of value is because it can't scale, right? Because to be able to buy a cup of coffee on chain is expensive because the network isn't able to scale. The layer 2 solution, which Lightning is the best example of, brings us to a point where fluid payments can happen at a lightweight level between peers and nodes in the system without actually translating most of those transactions or transacting them through the chain itself, and then that takes pressure off it, right? That we can build those sorts of systems is where the great hope lies, and they're really. And to Michelle's point here in that tweet, there is truly a lot going on, particularly I think in developing countries where they are taking it and turning it into a payments vehicle because of that Lightning Network. The other thing I think there's really huge potential in it, and it speaks to a similar notion, is that I see huge potential for Bitcoin to actually combine with the DeFi world. I see Bitcoin being this reserve asset in much the way that the dollar or a treasury bond is, and then systems of value get built on top of that in the same way that the traditional financial system has done it with bonds and everything else. So that you could imagine payment systems, insurance systems, lending collateral systems with Bitcoin as the base layer and all these other smart contract, decentralized exchange systems working on top of that to create a much more fluid financial environment. And if all of that plays out, which I think will take some time, then ultimately, yes, the rich will have gotten in on the ground floor, which isn't necessarily at all a good thing. And I worry enormously about that being the problem. But maybe then we actually still build this more frictionless environment on top of that Bitcoin base.
Right. And Paul, what are your thoughts on the dream of Bitcoin as a tool of inclusion and empowerment? We saw with the internet, in that context, it was said to be the great equalizer, unlocking access to information and knowledge and enabling people to self-publish from tweets to blogs to e-novels. But it's also led to the age of disinformation. Similarly, with Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, and CBDCs, will all money be monitored, or can it be subverted in some way in the future?
I think it's interesting. Much as our book didn't exactly get everything right, which, look, we would have been absolute geniuses if we had gotten everything right. I don't think Bitcoin has really turned out the way anyone actually expected, and it's going to be hard to predict where it goes. I think there are a couple things you need to keep in mind, though. One, we are well past the point where anyone's going to ban or outlaw Bitcoin. Like that's just that conversation is over. But what's interesting, I think, is that Bitcoin, and this is one of the reasons it's gone up so much, is it has become part of the capital markets. It is now part of it. In my mind, it rests on the extreme edge of the risk tolerance levels, but it is part of the capital markets. And all those people that came in last year, the Druckenmillers, the Tudor Joneses, all those people, they have made Bitcoin part of the financial markets. That is going to have some ramifications also, because there's a certain amount of control that they're going to want to have. So, Bitcoin's having a moment right now because the markets are in this speculative mania because the central banks have flooded the system with money. That is going to go on for a while, but that can reverse, and Bitcoin will have to deal with that. The bigger issue is going to be, moving forward, is going to be what everybody else does. Bitcoin showed people that you can make money digital. Everybody has absorbed that message now. Everybody is figuring out the best way that they can jump in on that. So Bitcoin had a window of opportunity for several years where it was really the only game in that town. That town has gotten a lot bigger. There's going to be a lot of competition. There are going to be a lot of competing different kinds of digital monies, and they're going to have different features. And I think, to your point, Christine, the issues of privacy and information and who has access to that are going to be absolutely huge. When you have national governments digitizing their money, who has access to it? Who has access to the data that is surrounding that information, that money, where it gets transacted, who controls it? That's going to be a massive, massive story that we have only begun to start thinking about. And to me, that's one of the biggest.
It is a big question.
Is money going to be free?
Right. It's a big question, history in the making, and we're seeing it unravel before us in real time. Thank you two for so much for joining us today, and we're so happy to be able to facilitate this reunion of the co-authors of The Age of Cryptocurrency as well as The Truth Machine. Thank you very much, Michael and Paul.
Thanks, Christine.
Thanks, Christine.
All right, that's it for All About Bitcoin. I'm your host, Christine Lee. Tomorrow, join us in the morning at 9 a.m. in New York for First Mover, your first look at the day's global crypto headlines. Our first guest will be Dr. Doom himself, who called out the 2008 housing bubble, economist and vocal Bitcoin critic, Dr. Nouriel Roubini. Can't wait. You're watching CoinDesk TV.